want to welcome you to Evaluation and Reporting webinar. I am very excited for this day as we launch this conversation. I don't know what it says about me that I love the evaluation conversations, but today we're going to be sharing some information with you about evaluation, about reporting, about next steps. And we do like to have interactive webinars. Unfortunately, this one is going to, the interaction is going to be a little bit limited because we have some information, quite a bit of information to share with you. So we'll try to keep as much time as possible for questions at the end. But don't worry if you feel like this is a lot of information, because we have, we're designing like a learning series to provide you some support and opportunities to ask questions. So today's the launch of Evaluation and Reporting, and you're going to hear from me and from Pamela, the Director of Evaluation Impact at Tamarack. This is going to be a quick check-in, and we'll ask you to write your name and your community and the traditional land and ancestral homeland of the Indigenous peoples from where you're calling from. I'm calling from Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Also, we want to note that we know that reconciliation is a process, and our hope is that this community of practice can be one of many regular recurring spaces where together we can unlearn harmful practices and replace them with stronger relationships and better ways of working with our Indigenous partners, youth, and communities. So now I invite everyone to, in the chat box, consider the traditional territory and write down your name, community, and the traditional land. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. And so the next slide is a bit of a survey. What we're going to ask you to fill out is to let us know what your level of experience is with evaluation, what your level of comfort is with evaluation, and do you have a member of your team, whether it's a backbone staff or the leadership table, who's experienced or knowledgeable about evaluation? And I believe Trisha's doing a survey here. There you go. Okay, so here is what we're seeing on this poll. So we've got a variety of different answers for the first question, with some experience, little experience, and then some very experienced. Your level of comfort, again, a wide range there. Actually, a little bit almost similar for each of the levels. And then, do you have a member on your team? Some not sure, and some yes. So quite a few of you have a team member who is experienced or knowledgeable. So this is going to really help us in designing the activities. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions around what kinds of supports, whether it's right after this webinar or anytime, reach out to your manager of cities around what kind of supports your specific community will require. So what we'll present to you today is an overview of Communities Building Youth Futures, our 5-year outcomes, what we've achieved so far. We're going to give you a sense of the evaluation framework and our timelines, some reporting guidelines, and next steps. Okay, so during this overview, you're going to recognize the information that we're sharing with you. So the CBYF goals are to address the persistent gap in high school attainment among youth in the 13 communities, to develop some strategies that enable young people to complete high school, to be engaged in their communities, to successfully navigate transitions from youth to adulthood, and to contribute to field building research and practice focused on youth engagement, health, and well-being in communities. Here are the 5-year project outcomes. So really, we're trying to increase the number of youth pursuing post-secondary education. We're improving academic outcomes, extending the number of community partnerships to support the reach. And here's the specific data. So I'm not going to read through it. We'll send you the slides so you will have access to this, but this has been communicated with you through many webinars. It's in the collaboration agreement. So this is the data, and these are the outcomes that we are trying to achieve with this 5-year project. And you're going to see everything that we're going to talk about during the evaluation and the reporting. It's all linked back to these 5-year project outcomes. So why 5,000 youth? So in the previous slide, you will have seen that, and I'll pull up the language here, that we say 5,000 youth will be engaged and supported in their education to employment journey. So why 5,000? How did we come up with the 5,000? So we basically took, for the 13 communities, we took the total number of youth between the ages of 10 and 14. And so that was 117,000 approximately. And then we took the average percentage of youth in these communities who do not complete high school. So that's 17.5%. And then we took the total number of youth who could benefit from CBYF. So that's 20,000 youth across the 13 communities. And so we gave ourselves a target of supporting 5,000 youth. And we find that that's an achievable number. It could probably be a lot more, but we thought 5,000 would be achievable. So if you then look, and we'll go through this with you over the next weeks and months around how you look at your population in your particular communities, and then you meet that the target for your community. So the 5,000 really is for youth for the whole project. So we've included in the PowerPoint the next slide, which gives you, it really gives you the number of youth for your community at the time that we develop these numbers, and then the high school completion. So basically, through this information, you'll be able to determine for yourself which percentage of that 5,000 that is going to be your goal. We want to remind you, one of the commitments of CBYF is really to take that collective impact approach and use the collective impact framework for doing the work. And one of the key parts of collective impact is around shared measurement. So the shared measurement components of collective impact is really about collecting data and measuring results consistently across all participants to ensure efforts remain aligned and that participants hold each other accountable. So really it's around exploring. That evaluation and reporting is going to be about exploring, about alignment, about tracking progress and tracking results. So that's the component of collective impact that the evaluation and reporting is based on. So before we ask you a few questions and we move on to Pamela's section of the presentation, just want to review with you some of the things, some of the results that we've achieved so far. And this is our data up to June 30th. So we have had over 108 youth that have participated in the community site visits across the 13 communities. And additionally, we've had participation by community leaders, and that was 413. By the end of June as well, we had 12 out of our 13 communities that had their site visits. And through the site visits, we had 521 partners and youth leaders that were engaged. We have terms of reference for our national collaborative, and that was co-designed with the advice and input of over 40 national youth serving partners. We had held our annual gathering with 78 participants, and 11 communities had been present there as well. Out of the 78 participants, 10 were youth leaders. We had, by June 30th, we had also done capacity building sessions that had engaged 717 community-based leaders through workshops, through webinars, and access to online tools, innovation fund, overview, newsletters, blogs. So 717 engaged people. I have a dog, and of course she is going to bark during the session. She's been quiet all morning. We have translated all of our relevant materials, all of our articles, webinars, site visits, community documents, and all of our materials are available in French and English. We're trying to make the access to those materials better and better every day. So if you have any suggestions for us, we're open and willing to consider any improvements. We have had a total of 5,334 engagements that have occurred, including Building Youth Futures webinars, national gathering resources, website, blogs, social media, newsletters, community innovation fund, and we've had Tamarack publication as well called Engage, where we've had 3,614 people. We've had 3 private webinars by the end of June, many more since then. We've had 44 communications with national collaboratives. We've had 521 people engaged in site visits, and we've had 260 people engaged through initiatives. So you can see not only that there's been a lot of work, but you can see how we're starting to track things. And so it's tracking not only participants, not only who engaged, but the different types of engagement, the different types of resources. So that's the overall project, the ways we're tracking. So start thinking about in your communities, tracking this kind of information and data. So we want to ask you a question at this point, and we're going to ask you to answer it in the chat box. So at first glance, what do you think will be your most pressing challenge to understand, document, and collect information related to our outcomes that we showed you? So what do you think is going to be the most challenging to understand, to document, and to collect information? So if you can just answer this. Oh, Kimber is posting now this question in the chat box. Just answer that, and we are going to keep track of that. And again, this is going to help us develop our resources and our supports for you. So we're going to give you 2 to 3 minutes to answer that. So we're getting people posting that, you know, making sure everybody understands the definitions, what to count, establishing baselines, making sure we're measuring what we want to measure. So if you have other things that are coming up for you right now, please post. If you, I see authentic communication with you during COVID, that is one of the biggest pressing challenges right now. And so just keep on posting. If something comes up at some point during the presentation, please, we encourage you to post it. If the webinar is over and you're thinking about it, send an email to us. Okay, thank you. Now, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to pass the presentation along to Pamela now.
Thank you, Natalie. And thanks everyone for your feedback so far. It's really nice to see everyone here. I haven't seen most of you actually since the national gathering. So I hope you're all doing well and keeping safe. Tricia, you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to present to you today an overview of the CBYF evaluation plan and framework, just to be able to give you some insights into what we're doing and how we're approaching things and where you guys and the communities fit into all of this, and as well to help support you in thinking about and moving forward with the planning and design of your own evaluation experiences and processes. So the goals of the shared evaluation framework help us to really understand collectively what the progress is about our work, and to keep track of things, to keep track of what's happening over the course during the duration of the interventions and the strategy and the communities, and of course, all of the various components of the work we're doing. It also helps us to leverage the contributions of the whole CBYF project. So really, as I just said, really what's happening nationally, because we have to look at evaluation from the national perspective of the entire CBYF program, and as well then to support and to gather data from the community level activities and interventions that are happening through your collective work. So another very important part and goal of the shared evaluation framework is that it is participatory and engaging, and really empowering to those who are engaged as not only as informants, but as stakeholders. And you are some of the key stakeholders in this work. And it's really important that it helps us to learn about what is working, what's not working, and helps us really to continuously make adjustments over time to strengthen our work, and not just look at evaluation as something that happens at the end of a project or at the end of an intervention. Another goal is that it helps us to focus on both the shifts programmatically, so around the community innovation projects, the different iterative experiences that are starting to take place and those that are being created as we move through the project. And of course, at the larger system level shifts. So really trying to understand what are some of those significant barriers that are impacting the youth in the communities, and how are we working to be able to address them and improving outcomes for young people. So an overview of the CBYF monitoring and evaluation plan. So really, it's quite straightforward in the sense that there are a few key things that we're trying to do. The study really is aiming to broadly understand the outcomes in the short term, the medium term, and the long term, and also just really look at the overall CBYF multi-year collective impact strategy throughout the project. So it's not only looking at outcomes, but it's also using the process to really build our learning and capacity of overall in the whole project. But it's specifically by doing this, we're doing this to build capacity of leadership in communities. We also are looking at this to influence behavioral change, to understand what are those influences and behavioral changes and thinking that's taking place, to understand better how we are building an understanding of systemic impacts and what those are and how they can be sustainable, for instance, and looking at what are the contributions to the strategic learning experience. So what is CBYF contributing to the learning that's happening at the community level and at the other levels as well? And of course, to understand best how we are influencing the thinking and the directions for future interventions that can take place. So this just is a bit of a zoom in on how the CBYF evaluation planning is taking place. And really, it's also a model and opportunity for you to use this to help maybe guide some of your thinking around your evaluation planning and experience around the collaborative approach to doing some evaluation planning. So as we know, the evaluation component of the CBYF is both to do the programmatic level evaluation, the national level evaluation, and collect data from the communities and the national collaborative, et cetera. But it is also one of the significant parts of the work is also helping you in the community to build your capacity around doing evaluation work and what's best for your communities. So for us, we start with selecting the type of evaluation process. And as I mentioned earlier, it's participatory, moving into empowerment experience, which means essentially that you as the leadership tables and the backbone structures will be taking on the responsibility to develop your evaluation plans and frameworks that are rooted in the work of the CBYF evaluation framework, and also that are significant and important to your own community experience. So part of that is also what we're doing what we've been doing and what we will continue to do, which is to engage stakeholders and informants in both the design and the planning and data collection and analysis experience. So this is sort of the first stage, is really trying to just select the kind of approach you want to take. Another key part of the planning is to start to develop foundational documents. And that involves developing a theory of change or the common agenda, the plan on a page. All of these different foundational documents to the work that you're doing are significant as well to planning the evaluation, because it needs to be integrated in a co-design process somewhat of doing the planning of your activities while you're also then having an opportunity to reflect and think about planning your evaluation. So this also, at this stage, includes looking at the plan, how to do a plan itself, the timeline of your work, identifying what are those existing shared data, where are the gaps in the data, gaps in the population level data, which is something we'll talk about in the next section. And also, what are the capacity building needs related to evaluation, as Natalie mentioned earlier. This is something that is important. We're developing a learning curriculum for the evaluation experience that you're going to be having, and we'd like to ensure that it's responsive to what your needs are. Another level of doing the planning is also then deciding on the scope of the evaluation. So what are the parameters around what you're evaluating, and looking at what types of approaches are appropriate, what will be appropriate in your context. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion around youth engagement approaches, and there's a webinar coming up around youth engaged evaluation processes. And I think these are things that we will make decisions about, and you will also be making decisions about as you go through your planning process. So in this, again, one of the important parts of doing collaborative evaluation planning and participatory planning is really to make sure that we know at every stage who are the stakeholders. And we know that the community leadership tables, the backbone structures, the stakeholders in the community are really important stakeholders and will be also informants to the data gathering stages. Another key part of the planning will be to select methods and tools to conduct the evaluation. So really, what will be the most appropriate in your context, again, will depend on who you're working with, who are your target groups, how are you going to be working with them, and what's your goal. So this basically means, you can work with arts-based methods from doing photo voice and different methods like that, or participatory video, or whatever it might be. These are all, there's a wealth of methods that we can share with you. We have a lot of tools available, and we can help to support that. But there's also an opportunity then to reflect on what's best for the practice that you're going to be implementing. And then, of course, how will these be used to engage youth, and what will be the connections between your methods and the tools you decide on and the work that you're already doing. And then, of course, validating the process and approach and tools is sort of where we're going to keep cyclically coming back to as we go through our evaluation planning and implementation, where we're going to pilot tools and do some revisions with them based on feedback we get from members of the community at different times, to try to ensure that they are as appropriate as possible for the communities, and also to engage in sense-making sessions and ensure that these are also youth engaged and youth friendly, and perhaps youth led in some capacity. So before I get into sort of the overall plan and the timeline for the evaluation for the CBYF, I just wanted to share back with you, as many of you know, we did send out a user profile survey to all of the communities. And these are some of the lessons learned from the community, from the data that we collected and synthesized. So there were about 35 respondents, and actually we did in fact receive another one from one of the communities. So there's 36 respondents. There was about 18 leadership table responses, so those who were engaged in the leadership table. There was 9 community conveners. There was 4 fiscal sponsors that responded, 1 youth leader, 4 community partners, and 3 from Tamarack. And overall, when we asked the question, as you're aware, when we asked the question about when you would like to engage in reporting and what value it has, there was 28 of the 36 actually responded that they really want to know more quarterly, annually. There was a desire to have midway reporting and consistent, continuous reporting throughout the next several years. And that is actually a really good thing because it's in line with this participatory process and collaborative approach to being able to ensure that there's strategic learning taking place throughout the process that can inform and improve and support the work that you're doing. So the key areas that we kind of identify as lessons learned were the relevance of the CBYF. Natalie, you have a question?
In the chat, people are asking if they can continue to send in their profiles.
Yeah, oh yeah, sorry, yes, I was going to mention that at the end. Thanks for raising that. Yes, please do send in your profiles because we'll be using this data throughout for the next several months especially, and would very much appreciate if you could send it in. That would be wonderful. We did receive from 8 of the communities, but we still are missing data from 6 of the communities. So if you can send them in, I encourage you to do so for sure. Thank you for raising that. So the 5 areas that we kind of learned lessons about were that people were very interested in what the relevance of the strategy has. So really what is going to be the value added because of the CBYF initiative and using the collective impact model to do this work in the communities over the next several years. People were interested in really in specifically around how this adds value to the communities and engaging with their youth. What are the creations of new opportunities for youth? What is Tamarac's approach working with Indigenous communities, community level approach to collaborative leadership, and really what influence is the CBYF having and how is it adding value in terms of the community's response to COVID-19 at this time? This is something that has come up and is also, there's an interest in understanding how the CBYF is having an influence in that way. Another area is around the effectiveness of the strategy. So really, what's the ability of the CBYF and the collective impact model having an influence to contribute to change in terms of specifically around achieving CBYF goals and objectives and outcomes, the level of youth engagement and leadership at the community level, capacity of youth to engage and or lead. So, you know, how effective has using this model and these approaches and building the capacity through the CBYF experience had an influence in affecting these changes in these ways. The level of community engagement to support youth, knowledge, skills, and behavioral changes at the community level with stakeholders and partners to collaboratively support youth to achieve outcomes, contributions to advocacy and policy dialogue. So these are all very much in line with a lot of the outcomes that we already have established, but these are actually also very much specific to your community experiences as well. And there was a lot of overlap, of course, between the different user profile responses, and these are the highlights of those. So as well, of course, the efficiency of the strategy. So really what the capacity to implement the strategy as planned with the allocated resources. So, you know, was there a return on investment? The financial, psychosocial supports available, did it influence some sort of capacity in these areas? How the style of learning and leadership led to successful implementation and a strong performance outcome. So really, you know, how well did we do, essentially, if we had to take the temperature of these different projects. And then, of course, there was lessons learned and interest and questions around impact of the strategy. So what changes have occurred as a result of the CBYF? So what contributions did the strategy have to those changes that have been identified over the course of the next several years? What real difference has been made to youth because of the activities implemented in the 13 communities? So this can specifically relate to the innovation fund activities, or it can relate to the overall engagement and collaboration and activities that are taking place overall. The number of youth that are affected, so overall outcomes, and this again relates back to what we're interested as well in understanding is the quantitative and qualitative experience in the data. Whether there's been changes in the youth population and the level of youth that are going back to school and participating in work experiences. And then of course, changes in the capacity on policy changes focused on youth. So these are really important. Actually, all of these are very much sort of grounding the thinking around what type of evaluation questions and interests you have in understanding the impact of the CBYF. So finally, the last section is really around learning and sustainability. So what will be the lessons learned and promising practices and future considerations that should be understood and perhaps identified, so that in the future, when there's a desire to think about closer to the end of the project about what's next, this will sort of inform that area. So really looking at aspects of the strategy that are sustainable without the backbone funding after 5 years, if that's what's going to be. Changes in the level of engagement across communities, the CBYF contributions on changes, improving the lives of youth graduating high school, and of course contributions of change resulting from youth engagement and leadership, the capacity and ability to scale to other communities. People were interested in how does scaling happen? What does it mean? How do we try to do this successfully and share the approach in a way that will encourage success in other communities? And of course, the contributions of the collective impact model in particular. Excuse me. So that's an overview of what we were able to gather from all of you who submitted your user profiles so far. And I'm sure that several of these aspects relate and resonate with you in your communities. Doesn't necessarily mean that all of them will. So again, this is just an overview for you to understand what's coming from the communities themselves. Okay, so I wanted to share with you an overview. This is a good sort of a timeline and understanding of the different elements that are happening over time, the planning and the implementation of the evaluation, monitoring, evaluation, and learning during the CBYF intervention. And so, I'm sorry, it's a little bit blurry. I think, and I hope when we send it to you, you can have another review, but I'll just go through it sort of quickly. So the red arrows really indicate where are we at in 2021 to 2021-22. We're in the process of doing the planning and designing of the evaluation overall for the CBYF, and as well we'll be supporting and coaching and supporting and providing support through the CBYF team to the communities to also do the planning and designing of their evaluation plans. And this is something that will reoccur over time as you go into working with new processes, and perhaps with the Innovation Fund as another component. And then the idea is that once you start doing the planning and design, once we do that, we're going to be going into sort of a phase of reflection and redesign. So meaning, and at the same time, while this is happening, of course, we're going to be doing the CBYF data gathering and analysis and reporting throughout all of the years that we're working together. And as well, the CBYF communities in your community context, you'll be doing data gathering, analysis, and knowledge sharing and reporting back to your community and with the CBYF. And we'll be doing knowledge sharing about and evidence sharing and sharing of results with communities, as well as with at the national level. So there's a lot of interaction between and knowledge management around different cross-fertilization of evidence coming out of the experience. And so we'll go into this sort of reflection and redesign process where, as we do in developmental evaluation experiences, part of the idea of doing data gathering and analysis in duration throughout the process annually is to help us reflect and then think about how can we change or improve or fill in a gap somewhere with the evaluation experience. And then of course, as we move towards the final years of the project in 23, 24, the idea is that we'll continue doing reflection and then sustainability planning and think about where can we go from here. And so as you can note in the boxes on the bottom, the reporting is going to be taking place a few times annually. Your first reporting process, as Natalie will get into that with you with more detail shortly, will be in a couple of weeks, on October 15th. And then the next report will take place in January, excuse me. And then there's an annual report that's going to be completed in April. And so we'll be calling on you with particular templates to share what your experience is and share the data that you're able to collect through different mechanisms. And we'll be sharing back with us the experience so far, and also being able to share that with your communities and your stakeholders and informants. So in the first year, one of the important parts is really to keep you informed of changes as they occur. So these are sort of some of the reasons for the way that this schedule is working, and also being able to build capacity for deepening your learning. And this is really an important part of the monitoring and evaluation process. This is where evaluation can play a crucial role in helping us all to reflect on how the work is going, and really how the leadership table is working or not working, and areas to strengthen or focus on more intentionally, and assess our own contributions leading to impact. So really, what are we doing and what do we need to do differently? And then there's also, these examples are also the ways we can use evaluation to really respond to some important questions around the success of our work, and understand how we're achieving results and why we're achieving them, not just what we're achieving. So this is an example of the CBYF plan on a page. And we've talked with you, I think, already about the plan on the page when in previous webinars. And I think it's something it's really helpful and important part of the evaluation design process as well, because it really helps to situate. It's sort of like the theory of change foundational piece. So really, we look at the plan on the page, and the first part of it is looking at, we are the communities building youth futures. We are intended as a movement aimed to collaboratively engaging and supporting youth through high school graduation and beyond. And so how do we do this? There's really 5 investments that CBYF is making over the next 5 years or 4 years now to come to some success with the intervention. The first one is really working with, starting from you, with the 13 communities, and investing in as the grounding place for the CBYF collective impact strategy. And then, as you know, then the 13 communities that we're investing in include also a capacity building component. And also the capacity building component includes coaching, consulting, and evaluation support and technical support, and conducting the evaluation and learning from that. And then another important part of the CBYF intervention is really, it's helping to strengthen and ground opportunities for creativity and integrating the wealth of wisdom and knowledge that the communities are bringing to the experience, with cross-fertilization of knowledge and skills, etc., which is also being supported and strengthened through these creative sort of integrated, more innovation projects. And the Innovation Fund is that component that will address that. And then finally, the last one is really the National Collaborative, which is working with experienced practitioners and youth leaders and advocates aimed to build knowledge and movement around collaboratively to engage and support youth through high school graduation and beyond. So, and you see that youth are really at the center. This is something that as far as your particular activities and your plans and your plan on a page, the youth at the center is a really important part of the CBYF experience, and it's something that we've been talking a lot about. And so this is another very important central piece of CBYF. And then of course the CBYF commitments to involve the youth as leaders and engage them in the different aspects of the work and leverage the collective impact strategy overall. And I'll just leave that with you, and I'll move to the next slide, please. With the systems change framework, I'm going to try to go through this a little bit quickly, but I'll give you just an overview because I don't want to run short on time. We're using, because of the complex nature of the work that we're doing, but also the multiple contexts in which we're working and the unique contexts in which each of these communities bring to the project and to the work you're doing, we're grounding the CBYF in a systems change framework. And it's important that we understand like what this means. And so when we talk about, the complex context, we're really talking about something where it's helpful to understand we're working and the ways we're attempting to create systems change and make change to the system and address the issues that are affecting youth. And it really helps us to see the effects of the interconnectedness of the system on the social, environmental, political, economic. They're all part of the greater sort of impact and framework that we're working in. So I think what's important here is really to identify, that we're trying to change the status quo. We're trying to look at shifting the function of structures and identified in the system. And when we look at this particular model, we start with the CBYF, which is at the bottom, the green bar at the bottom, where you see the various components of the CBYF intervention, and as well the CBYF impact and the outcomes that are identified here on the plan on the page, and the overall evidence of the improvements to youth outcomes based on these various factors around higher numbers of youth pursuing post-secondary, the improvement of overall academic achievements, reported overall engagement, etc. And so where we start from is really from the bar at the bottom, that's with where the project is entering the system. And we see that the first stage is really working with 13 communities to implement the collective impact strategy. And this is really the aim of this is to build the capacity and establish a common agenda, for instance, which is foundational to understanding the strategies in place to improve outcomes for youth. And it really helps us and sort of what we need to know and also what we need to learn, and then go through the process of learning and start to build that capacity and build the foundations of the process that we're grounding our work in. And for the CBYF, this means implementing all of these activities and putting in place supports for the communities to achieve the best outcomes. The next layer that we go into in the system is innovation in 13 communities. And so by building capacity and doing this ground level work, we are working towards creating an environment that is ripe for creativity and supporting and investing in innovation activities, and really looking at what are the promising practices of that and lessons learned, and engaging in evaluation of those activities so we can understand best how to move forward and what to focus on. The next layer to the systems change framework and to the work that we're doing is really looking to nudge the system. So by doing capacity building and integrating these innovative projects and piloting new experiences, we're hoping to nudge the system, meaning, to really, over time, create more activities that are included, and opportunities for strategic learning that can strengthen the work that's taking place, and also nudge sort of changes in the systems themselves. As you know, we work in a system, it's not in a vacuum. And so this is something that's really important. By attaining and doing the 3 first levels of systems change, what are we hoping to achieve is really a shift in awareness and culture within our communities and within the youth movement itself and supporting youth. And so we are intentionally trying to do this through the work that we're working on. So when we're thinking about our projects and our plans, we're thinking about it in a context of a greater systematic approach. And then, of course, we are working not in a vacuum and intentionally trying to activate different practices. And so really, what are we trying to achieve is a shift in culture and awareness that will also then build a new landscape or improve the landscape that exists, meaning, we're working within Canada, and so we'll, maybe perhaps it'll influence governments, the government of Canada to, again, reinvest in youth in the communities, or create new national policy and strategies, for instance. And so the systems change really works to create these changes. And then as you see those arrows going down, it means that whatever the changes that occurred and the shifts in the system and the culture will seep back into where we start from in the next stage of work, where we're building capacity in communities at a new level. And there's a new dialogue going on around these issues and new practice. So that's in a nutshell. It's a lot of information, I realize, and I'd like to leave some time for what we need to focus on as well for the reporting. I'm sorry it took a little longer than expected, but I think it's important that you know how the evaluation framework is working. So I'll pass it on. So in terms of we have a question for you around maybe which topics discussed so far would you like to spend more time on? And if you could just take a minute or two and just write in the chat some of your responses, that would be really helpful. And thank you very much. And I'll pass it back to Natalie. Kimber has added the question into the chat box for you, so you could just take a minute to answer. Thank you. And I'll go through your questions as well.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And again, this is the question we're thinking about for you. We want you to think about it right now and put it in the chat box. But as we continue the conversation today, please keep adding. This is a question as well that your managers of cities are going to be asking you. So it is not your only opportunity to answer this question. So I'm going to go to the reporting section, and I'm very mindful of the time. So just in case you're getting nervous around, there's so many questions and so much more information, what we really wanted to provide to you today is the foundational pieces around the evaluation framework as well as reporting. And you're going to have everything within this package, with this presentation. And then we will be working with you, and we can go through any section of this to help you with your next steps. So around reporting. So the link, the next slide, around the link between evaluation and reporting. So when Pamela talked to you about the systems change for the project overall, that was that last table with the arrows. So when I look at that, and I have to keep remembering that this is for the project overall. As a community, you're going to be looking at the column on the left-hand side, and you're going to be saying, what activities related to each of those is relevant to our community. You're not going to be looking at everything within that systems change framework for your community. Some will be relevant to you and some will not. Some things around the landscape and nudging the system, you may have a couple, but for the project overall and the work that we're doing with the National Collaborative, that might be more relevant to us. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this. You don't have to have all of this in your evaluation framework. But when I look at that slide, I also see that the data that we're asking from you and the data you're going to be reporting on will be related to those outcomes and to that slide. And so I'm going to keep going here to the next slide. This should be also familiar to you. So those are the community indicators, and annually you'll be reporting them, but we're also going to be asking you to start looking at that information and that data right away. But annually we want to have all of this information, but we're going to be starting in phases. So basically the number of youth in your communities. We're going to be asking about attendance, absenteeism, not for October 15th, just letting you know. But you need to really be thinking about those community indicators, and you've all seen them before. So we're going to move to the next slide, which really talks about your key deliverables and your key milestones. And those were shared with you by your managers of cities, and these are also familiar. So we wanted you to have a local convener, fiscal host, everybody has that. You're recruiting your cross leadership table and continuing to develop your leadership table. You're recruiting your backbone staff. So these are all your key deliverables. We will be asking you to report on those as well. And so see the fancy colors on the right-hand side and the left-hand side. The right is really the community indicators. The left is those project outcomes. So those are the ones that we talked to you about early on in the presentation, around the 5,000 youth, around the 25% around graduation rates. So everything that you provide to us from the community feeds into the project outcomes. So we're going to move on to the next slide around the reporting that we want for October 15th. So over the next couple of months, what you're going to be working on your common agenda, on your community plan, and based on this information, on the information that we talked to you today, you're also going to start thinking about your evaluation framework and identifying what data you need to collect. So for October 15th, we're going to ask you to report on some data on the next 3 slides, and by the after this presentation, we're going to be sending you a template so that you can report on the data we need. But The main reason for this one slide is to say, this is going to be a phased approach because we know you're developing your common agenda and your priorities and your community plan. And we know you're going to need to develop your evaluation framework. And we know that you're also going to be getting our support for evaluation and reporting. So it's going to be a phased approach of capacity building while we start asking you for some reporting of data. So for October 15th, we do want to know the total number of youth in your community for each of the following grades. So grades 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. For Quebec, you're looking at high school, alors secondaire, secondaire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, secondary 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the reason why we're asking for each of those years is really because we're trying to support youth in that transition period. And the transition period is not only the last year before you graduate from high school, the transition period really starts around grade 8. So we want you to report to us on the total number of youth in your community in those grades. And then we're shifting a little bit. We're asking you to think about the new partnerships and the new networks that have been developed since you started on CBYF. So that's like, well, we met with this private company and they're now on our leadership table, or we didn't know about this community group and they're now on our leadership table, or we are partnering with these people on our innovation project or on this initiative. So we want you to start thinking about the partnerships and networks that you're developing and on any new innovative approach. And so that doesn't really only mean you're an innovation project. It could be a new tool, it could be a new process, it could be a pilot project, it could be a training, it could be creating an advisory group, anything that's innovative and new for your community. So we want you to start reporting on that. And then when you developed your budget, you were telling us about the in-kind contributions that you've received. So we want you to report on that. But as well, if that has changed since you have given us that information, we want you to let us know. And for the remaining of the community indicators, which is really slide 26, what we want you to start thinking about is who in your community can provide this data. So if we're looking at graduation rates, who can provide this data? Who do you need to connect with? Where are your possible data sources? So that's a piece of homework. It's not really, and you can report on that. Some of you may not know the answers to those questions, but we really want you to start thinking about that. It's really around the key deliverables and key milestones. So for each of those milestones, what activities have been conducted? So where are you with your backbone staff? So just tell us like an update on these deliverables and milestones. And it's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock Nova Scotia, 2 o'clock Eastern. And then we're going to put in some reflection questions for you as well. So what gaps exist in the following areas? Reflect back on your most significant achievement, and you know, to what extent have you seen any changes to knowledge, skills, and behaviors? So we're asking for some reflection on those questions. So those are the 3 parts of reporting for October 15th. Your manager of cities and your coaches can help you with any part at all of the reporting on this. I'm going to skip this slide, but you're going to have it in your package. It's basically, again, to get you thinking about this is the kind of data that we're going to want in the coming months. So how are you going to get it, and who do you need to work with to ensure you have that data? And the next steps. So for the next steps on our end, we are taking the information that you provided today in the chat box. Your manager of cities is going to check in with you on this presentation, and we are going to do a targeted learning series and support series for evaluation and reporting. And it's going to align with the other work that you're doing on Common Agenda on building a community plan. So on your end, your next steps are to start thinking about establishing a small team, maybe 2 people or 3 people. whether it's from the backbone staff or and members of your leadership table. And so that small team is going to help with the learning series. So they will be attending if we have another webinar, if we have coaching, if we have a community of practice. So your small team is going to participate, and there will be homework. They will meet with your manager cities and your coach to support the homework, and they're going to help provide the evaluation and reporting requirements. And so following today, what we are going to be doing on the next slide is we're going to give you a recording of this presentation, and we're going to provide you with a reporting template. And on October 15th, from 12 to 1 Eastern, we're going to have a community of practice that really is up to you what we discuss on it, and it's going to be free flowing. So it's not a presentation, really, it's a community of practice around evaluation and reporting. So we wanted to provide you this this time for we wanted to provide you all this information. There's not a lot of time for questions, and I know some of you will have to jump off, but are there any pressing questions at this time that you want to either put in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question? Does anybody have any comments? And Trisha's going to stop sharing her screen any moment. Any comments, ideas, suggestions, questions? Normally when we don't get anything, we take it as a clue that there was a lot of information, a lot to digest. A couple of people in the chat box here. A lot of thanks.
Natalie, there is one question that's come in.
Yep. Okay.
The agreement states that the fiscal sponsor submits the report. Can we clarify how this would be approached?
That's a very good question. We really need to think about some of that, because even when I was going through, you know, you're a small team. You're a small team that puts together the information, but of course it's reporting. So it will have to go through your leadership table when it's a, you know, when it's a report. And if it's the fiscal sponsor for your community as well as the convener, then yes, then you would have to run through, that small team would have to run through their convener, the fiscal sponsor, to say, you know, here are the questions and here's what we propose as answers. Absolutely. Any other pressing questions? Okay, so again, it's a lot of information. It is our launch into amazing conversations we're going to keep having around evaluation and reporting. But we wanted to provide you all this information in one place, and then the follow-ups will be a lot more interactive, will be based on what your questions are and what your needs are. Pamela, Trisha, and Kimber, am I forgetting anything? Is there anybody that wants to add anything?
No, thank you. I think you've made every point that was important. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to quickly launch the last poll so we can get your feedback.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the 7 minutes overtime that we are, and for staying with us. We will be in touch with you, and we will follow up with an email, but as well with your manager of cities. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
And I'm noticing, I forgot to mention, I'm noticing the orange shirts around the table. And so appreciate people recognizing Orange Shirt Day today. Thank you. Bye-bye.